Queue is closed. Last question, Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Bernanke, I appreciate your time today, and I remember our discussions last year. And one thing I asked my staff in the last few days to read through transcripts of the 2006 Federal Open Market Committee meetings, and looking at those comments and the transcripts, is it fair to say that the Fed did not see the severity of the housing crisis coming in 2006?
I think I think the mistake was a little different than that. House prices were already falling in 2006, and we were aware of that. What we didn't know was what was the impact going to be, and in particular, we didn't have a sufficient understanding of how the fall in house prices, the resulting effects on mortgage quality, and so on would affect the financial system. That was the linkage that we didn't see in 2006. So yes, obviously we didn't see the crisis coming, but we certainly were aware in 2006 that the housing market was cooling, and we talked about that quite frequently, and I talked about it in testimony. I have to emphasize that we've learned a lot of lessons from that experience, and we have radically changed the way we do our supervision, and also in particular we now focus very much on the interactions between different parts of the system, looking at it from a systemic point of view, not just from individual institutions. So while I can never promise that we won't have another financial crisis, I think we have made a lot of progress in our ability to monitor those situations.
And Mr. Bernanke, looking at the economic projections from last January, if I have the right ones here, you projected growth of 3.4 to 3.9% for GDP for this past year. It came in at 1.7. What happened, and what kind of expectations do you have that will you potentially be that far off for your projections for the coming year?
I'd like to look at those numbers. I don't recall what our projection was, but there were, I would say, two classes of things. One is that there was some developments that were impossible to anticipate, like the tsunami in Japan and its implications for global supply chains and the like, or the effects of the Arab Spring on oil prices, a few things like that. But I think more generally it is fair to say that since the recession ended, that we have, until recently at least, been too optimistic about the pace of recovery. And as I go back and look at the reasons for it, I think the two main areas I would point to, one is the housing sector, which I've talked about today, which has not recovered the way we had hoped and expected, and continued pressure in financial markets, part of which is related to Europe, which again we didn't fully anticipate in 2010.
But you believe those factors were the primary reasons you were about 100% over the actual growth we achieved this last year, which was an anemic 1.7%. Again, these are your figures. 3.4 to 3.9% was the range. You projected for 2012 3.5 to 4.4%, and now you're back, I guess, more reality, you're projecting roughly 2% growth. That's pretty far off and pretty rosy, and we sat in this room here and thought we had some difficulties. I'm just concerned with how comfortable and confident you are on how long we'll stick at the 2% growth.
Macroeconomic forecasting is very difficult. We don't pretend that we have a crystal ball. What we try to do is set our projections at a level where we think the chances of being too optimistic are roughly equal to the chances of being too pessimistic. So we'll see what happens.
I understand. That's the range.
We could be better than we expect.
Yeah. Well, I would hope it would be. But seeing those figures that have been talked about earlier, how we have such an anemic recovery, the worst one since the war, we're 13.7 million jobs short of where we would be on an average recovery. And from your estimates, I have not seen that coming out that is getting that flavor for that. One other thing I want to mention about the transcripts, and others have talked about thanking you for being a big supporter of transparency, but is there a reason you have to wait 5 years to release transcripts of your meetings for transparency purposes?
Well, that was the agreement that was made with Congress. I think it was a reasonable compromise. No other central bank virtually releases transcripts ever. The Bank of Japan does after a 10-year lag. As far as we're aware, no other government agency releases the transcripts of confidential meetings. It has a real cost to our deliberation process. When the transcripts were begun to be released, the meetings became much more scripted, much less free interchange. So I think it would inhibit the discussion process and the free exchange of ideas. 5 years seems to us to be an appropriate compromise. It certainly satisfies the needs of history. And again, it's a more aggressive, transparent policy than other agencies or other central banks.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, 15 more seconds just to close on that comment.
Go fast.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate this, but this is America, and we are responsible for fiscal policy, and the impacts, particularly the proposals you have made on housing policy, suggest an incredibly bigger role than in other countries. So I appreciate the transparency. I wish we'd step that up so the American people feel more comfortable with decisions that have been made. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. You've indulged us for 2.5 hours. Appreciate your patience, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.